Hello, my name is Carl Surrey and this is a video tutorial for two Facebook groups, one being fans of Serif software and the other Affinity Designer and Photo group. Now, in the fans of Serif software Facebook group, someone asked whether we could have sort of like a tutorial on making composite images. And that was, and I'm very sorry if I'm mispronouncing this very badly, but I'm guessing it's pronounced Corneliu Frauescu, and he wanted sort of more tutorials on making composite images, and like I did say at the time, it's not really my strong point and not something I'm very good at. But I did say I would see if I could find an easy Photoshop tutorial that I might be able to adapt. Now, what I have found is this tutorial here, and again I'm going to have trouble with the pronunciation, but it's Nemanja Sekulic is the person who made this, and it's a pretty good video, and I'm sure if you watch this you will be able to sort of follow along in Affinity Photo pretty well. And basically what he's done, he took this picture of this girl and the post box from some street scene, and he's added it to this path image, and he also added this crack on the floor, pavement in the pavement here. Now, there is a link on this page here where you can get these two images to download and try for yourself, and I will add a link to this particular tutorial in the description to this tutorial, so you can follow along or just watch it and see how you get on with it, and if you want you can download the images and try it for yourself. I'm not going to use these images, partly because it's probably even this is probably a bit beyond my capabilities at the moment. I wanted a slightly simpler idea, which is why I've got a similar sort of pathway image, and I'm just going to put something onto that pathway. So what I've got is two images from Pixabay.com, and this is of this dog running towards the camera, and this image of this wooden walkway that's going off into the distance. So I just wanted a picture of the dog running down the Broadway, and this is what I've ended up with so far. Unfortunately I didn't make notes when I was doing this test run, so I'm going to have to sort of play it by ear while I do this again. So let me just close that down. So like in the video Photoshop tutorial which I mentioned earlier, at the beginning of that the gentleman sort of does explain that the best thing to do is to get images that are from the same perspective, in the sense of if one image is the camera's looking down on the subject and the other image the camera's looking up, the perspective will look wrong, and they should also have sort of similar lighting conditions and things like that, so it helps with the blending. I'm sure there are probably ways around that, but as that video and this video is just looking at the very basics, that is probably very good advice, and he does a lot more of this sort of work than I've ever done. This is probably only my third or fourth attempt at something like this, so which is why the image which I've made probably doesn't work as brilliantly as I would hoped it would, because obviously this picture of the dog is sort of taken at pretty much the eye level of the dog, whereas this pavement or wooden walkway we're sort of looking down on it slightly, so I've already broken that rule a little bit, but these were the best two images that I could find quickly that I thought I could make a composite image from. So this is going to be my main background image, and if you are going to if you don't use these images and you're using your own or some other image, at least if you're starting your journey on making composite images, I would probably avoid pictures that have shadow in them, because obviously you've then got to try and match those shadows and things like that. So what I'm going to do in this particular version is I'm going to crop out this shadow at the bottom like so. So the only real clue as to where the sun is in this particular image is the shadow running down the side of this cornfield. I'm hoping that'll make it a little less obvious where the shadow is. So I'm going to come back to the dog picture. So first thing we need to do is to cut out this dog. Now in the Photoshop tutorial he uses the pen tool, which is a tool that I really do not get on with that well. I would probably, if I was going to do it sort of properly, I would probably use, me personally, I would use the freehand selection tool and then go with polygonal. But just for speed here, I'm going to go with the flood selection tool, and I'm going to start off with contiguous and a tolerance of 20 and just click in the middle of this dog's face, and then I'm going to go to add, and then I'm going to click a few more times to get most of the dog. I'm not going to get all of it, but we're going to get most of it. And then once I've got the majority of it, I'm just going to come to the selection brush tool, and this is also on add, and I'm just going to mop up a few of these sort of areas where there's obviously no selection been made. And I do stress that I am only doing this for speed. If I was doing this properly, as obviously that you are going to do when you try this at home, is to use a better tool to make your selection. Let me just zoom in and see whether there's any things I've missed. Now one thing I will do is this paw that's on the sand here. I am just going to select a little bit of the sand, a bit like the gentleman did in the Photoshop tutorial, and I will sort of try and blend that in a bit later. So let's just quickly zoom up here and see whether there's any major bits I've missed. Right, I think we're almost there. Right. Right, there I go, that'll do. Right, I think I've got everything there, so now I've got the majority of the dog. I just want to sort of get some of these hairs and loose bits around the outside. So to do that, I'm going to come to refine, and with the brush I'm going to just click and draw down the side of the dog, and this should help make some selections of the finer hairs around the edge. It doesn't matter if you go over an area a couple of times, because you may get some of the stray hairs that you missed the first time showing up in the second pass. Almost done. Right, so once I've gone around that, I'm going to just click apply. I'm going to press Control and 0 just to zoom out. And looking at this, there's some areas here that I'm somehow not selected. I'll just go back and grab those. Right, I think that's everything. So now I'm going to add a layer mask to that. So that now is the dog cut out from the background, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and highlight that layer which has the layer and the mask, and I'm going to right click that and click copy, come to my boardwalk image and then edit and paste, and it will just paste that image and the mask at the same time. And then I'm going to come to the move tool, just click in the middle of this image, put it roughly in the middle, and then I'm going to hold down the control key and come to one of the corners, and I will reduce the size of the dog, and because I'm holding down the control key, the dog will stay in proportion. And then it's just a case of positioning this and reducing the size as in where you think it might be needed. Like so, that doesn't look too bad. So I'll just come off the move tool, so I'll lose the bounding box around the outside there. So I mean, as you can see, that sand, bit of sand that was left around the toes there in this particular image, it doesn't sort of really show up that badly on this bit of wood. You wouldn't even know that is part of the image. I mean, if I zoom in, I mean, it does look pretty similar in colour and shade as the wooden boardwalk. So press Control and 0 to centre that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to highlight the pixel background pixel layer and make a new pixel layer in between this and the dog layer, and I'm going to come to the paintbrush tool and have black as my foreground colour, I am just going to lower the opacity a bit. Let's go down about 60% odd. And although I have taken out this shadow that was down the bottom to show that there is, or I didn't want too much shadow, I am just going to sort of paint in a sort of shadow around the under the dog, as you can see, this is not really my forte. And then I will just lower the opacity of the actual layer rather than the paintbrush, just to sort of knock that back a bit. It's not brilliant, but it's about the best that I can do. And then I will just hold down the control key and click on that background layer above, so both are highlighted, and then right click and group those together. So the shadow, if I click on the move tool now, the shadow will move with wherever the dog goes. So the last thing I really want to do on this is I just want to change the perspective of this dog layer slightly, so that it's sort of leaning backwards and sort of has a similar sort of feel to the way the pavement is going here. So I will come to the perspective tool. Let me just zoom in a bit. And I'm just going to drag this up and backwards, sort of, but come inwards slightly, so the width of the image is smaller at the top than it is at the bottom. And then I'll click apply, Control and 0, and then come off the move tool, and then hopefully that does give a slightly better perspective, which I didn't have before because of the dog image being more head on rather than looking down onto the dog. Now my moving this around, this sort of sand area here has started to sort of show up a bit more, so what I'll do is I'll select the eraser tool and set the opacity quite low, hardness is on 0, and have a smaller brush and just tone that back a little bit, so again it starts to look more like the wooden layer underneath. So the last thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to add an adjustment of the hue, saturation and luminance, and I'm just going to bump up the overall saturation to put a bit more colour into the sky and the grass and hopefully the dog there. And I will also add a levels adjustment. You don't have to do this, it's just my personal choice, and I'm just going to drop the gamma back slightly just to bring back a little bit of the contrast in the image. So that is really the end of my very basic look at making a composite image. It's a case of cutting out the subject you want to add to the image and then blending it and manipulating it in a way that it fits the image better. Now the more you do this, obviously you will get better at it, and then you can sort of muck around with adding shadows and things like that. And for people who do composite images all the time, and you're probably sitting there pulling your hair out saying I did all this wrong and I did that wrong, I admit I'm not very good at this sort of thing, but I'm hopefully pointing people in the right direction so they can learn a bit and I can learn a bit at the same time. So I'm hoping that answers the questions that were needed, and thank you for watching, and goodbye.